Good morning, everybody. This is Easton Kaboshik with the Soy Aquaculture Alliance. I want to just thank you all for being here. We are 2 minutes before our official start time, so we'll wait just a little bit and then kick things off right at 10 Central. All right, now our attendees are piling in. Everyone comes in last minute, right? Jerry, Hannah, Kevin, you guys ready to just get started? Thumbs up. All right. Well, again, welcome everyone to the Soy Aquaculture Alliance webinar. This is titled Seed into Feed, how soybeans can be used as feed aquaculture. Really, our goal here is to help and talk with experts and farmers about how soybeans are so vital and important to aquaculture and the overall mission of the organization, our purpose. So I invite you, first of all, just to briefly introduce myself. I'm relatively new to this role, started in April as the executive director of Soy Aquaculture, replacing Kenlin Johannes, icon in the soybean industry, and certainly a resource and a value to me as I transition into this role. But my background is actually in commodity associations. I've been at the Iowa Soybean Association for close to 8 years now, managing other associations. So my graduate and undergraduate education and my professional experience has really been in leading nonprofits, specifically trade associations. And I'm very happy to be back here in agriculture as I grew up on a dairy farm in Northeast Iowa. So getting to apply my passion for agriculture in a new space. Still a novice to aquaculture, especially, but I'm looking forward to getting to know more, especially from our experts here today. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. All the attendees you're all muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, this webinar will be recorded and available on the Soy Aquaculture website, which is soyaquaculture.org. Our panelists today are Jerry Baumbauer, Farmer Director and now currently Secretary of Soy Aquaculture Alliance. We have Hannah Lucas, who is the Business Development Manager International for Benson Hill. And then we have Kevin Fitzsimmons, a PhD at the University of Arizona, who is the Director of International Initiatives, Research Scientist, and a number of other titles, including Professor, right, Kevin? We are certainly an expert in this space. I think it's helpful just to understand who's joined us today. It looks like we have a majority of QSSBs, so hello, soybean family. We have 24% in the academic world, likely research partners of SAA. Aquaculture industry, welcome. A few other agriculture, feed companies, and media. So welcome, everyone. I do appreciate you all being here today. And we'll try to be conscious of your time. So I have a phone here looking at time, making sure we're making this productive. Before we kick things off, and I'm going to invite Jerry, I hope you're unmuted here, to help add flavor and context to all of this, because Jerry is more veteran in SAA than I am, but I'll do my best to give you the high-level view of our mission, which is really simple. We see a tremendous amount of opportunity in aquaculture, and so our mission is to help aquaculture grow, and by doing so, expanding the use of U.S. soy in their diets in domestic aquaculture. That opportunity I mentioned, there's really just a huge trade deficit in domestically produced aquaculture. 85 to 90%, I try to be conservative in my 85%. 85% of the seafood that we consume here in the US is imported. So that means we are selling soybeans abroad, paying the freight both ways, and then shipping aquaculture and seafood back here to the US. So we just see this as a tremendous opportunity to have locally produced soy fed to locally, sustainably, affordably produced seafood. So again, back to our opportunity, we are simply just trying to grow domestic aquaculture and therefore benefit soybean farmers. Obviously, we have a couple of barriers. Regulation, I think that might be a barrier across any, if we have an aquaculture webinar or we have any other webinar, regulation is always going to be a barrier. A number of threads down that, but it's not necessarily SAA's focus, though we do support the National Aquaculture Association, excuse me, for example, and other regulatory advocacy agencies. Other barriers, and this is really where we step in, is unlike poultry or pork or beef, there are a number of different species, and every one of those species has a unique need. And I'm sure Kevin will be able to elaborate on this, but there are specific feed formulations and barriers for every type of fish and shrimp that we hope to grow. So SAA is investing in the research and the partnerships and all of the barriers, all the solutions to all those barriers per species. It's really where the majority of our focus is. Technology is also a barrier. So having systems that can be utilized and most importantly cost effective for aquaculture farmers to help that industry grow. Right now, the majority is, as I understand, is very niche, very local. So in order to get that to scale, we have to improve some of our systems and technology. And I think there's just a limited awareness. So I'm so glad to see so many of our QSSB members, farmer members involved on this call, because in order for this to become important, we have to build awareness. We have to build, enthusiasm around the growth of aquaculture, and then by doing so, the use of soy in those diets. So currently, we have 12 members. The way that SAA works is there are state soybean associations. So again, welcome. They are members, and not only members serving on our board, but also the funders of this. Of all of our work. So, and we have one non-voting industry member, Prairie Aquatech. That's part of my mission really, is to start building closer relationships with industry. And I'll get into that in a little bit. As I mentioned, our 12 members, which are listed here, are providing the overall strategy and guidance, funding, they're directing projects, and they're really the voice of the farmer, right? So this is a farmer-funded organization. They're representing the voice of the farmer and what priorities and is important to them and important to aquaculture. So it's one of the things I find most fascinating about SA is really it's aquaculture farmers and soybean farmers working together to benefit one another. And then lastly, I won't belabor this too much and hopefully let Jerry speak a little bit more. But the programs that we're doing, again, I mentioned primarily research. We also have feed producer and industry relations. So we're meeting with folks like Benson Hill, Ziegler, Cargill, a number of other feed formulators and nutritionists. We do a small bit in international marketing, but fortunately, we have great friends and partners in USEC and other international organizations that are helping grow soy demand internationally. And then lastly is our education efforts, which is part of this webinar. And another great example, last week, we just held our first virtual nutritionist workshop where 24 graduate level nutritionists, future nutritionists in the field, feed formulators in the field, got their hands on the software they need. They got an education on the value and use of soy in aquaculture diets, and got to learn directly from international organizations already doing this. So it was a great event. I'm very happy to host that and fund that. Otherwise, just a quick look, active projects for research. You can get a sense of the scale that we're currently doing and that we're trying to improve. So open invitation to any way that we can help you as an aquaculture industry grow or identify new projects at the state level for QSSBs. I'd like to start coordinating those better, but this gets you a sense of, we have 9 active projects between education and raw research, surpassing $500,000 in work this year. A few of the species we're working in is rainbow trout, California yellowtail, Florida Baumbauer, and Atlantic salmon. We also have a largemouth bass project going on. So, and lastly, before I stop, a couple of shifts, and I'm really speaking to QSSBs right now, and I guess the broader industry. But one of the opportunities that we're pursuing is how to improve our outcomes, and I think that part of that mission is really removing the friction in its operations. Right now, SAA has been a little bit admin heavy, and I'm hoping to just simplify that in a better model of funding. Whereas at QSSB, it's one proposal instead of every proposal for all the species I just mentioned, and then one annual level of funding, and that'll allow us to be much more nimble and reactive, and also have much more continuity across year to year research and outcomes. So that's part of the shift that we're exploring. So far, I've spoken with I was just in Nebraska yesterday. Lovely. Hello, Nebraskans. Actually, I think they're in their board meeting today, but lovely 8-hour car drive to talk to them about this. And it definitely makes sense to them. It makes sense to a number of the other states that I've spoken with. And I believe that'll be a path that we pursue after our August board meeting officially. And then more importantly is I'm so glad, again, Benson Hill is here. I have meetings coming up with a few other feed producers and formulators regarding how to drive the outcomes of the organization based on the market and the value chain. So having the conversation with Benson Hill, for example, upfront about what are the best opportunities to drive aquaculture growth domestically. And then from that, where can SAA fund the research that needs to be done, remove some of the barriers, or be a true partner to you and to the customers, to the aquaculture farmers that you serve to make that happen. Because I can tell you, soybean farmers are very interested in making that happen. It's really just a better alignment of where our dollars are going to maximize those outcomes. And then by doing so, of course, I want to expand membership. So we have 12 states. I think there are closer to 30 that I'd love to get involved, especially because some of the smaller soybean producing states are actually some of the biggest aquaculture states. I think that there's an opportunity to draw more collaboration there, and it shouldn't be a barrier for a smaller state to be involved. In fact, you should be at the table up front because that's where the forefront of aquaculture is. So those are the challenges. Again, this is my vision. This is like a 6-year plan. I'm about 3 months in. So we're making really great progress. I just wanted to share that vision. So especially the soybean states and the aquaculture folks on the call today understood how serious SAA is about our partnership with you and the vision that we have going forward. I won't share upcoming dates, but just one last call to action. Please do engage with SAA. How can help us help you? I know that's a cliche, but it's truly, I want to learn from you. As I mentioned, I'm humble in admitting that I'm a novice to the aquaculture industry, but I'm certainly, gifted in building partnerships and driving outcomes. So if you can help me understand what's needed, I can certainly help align the resources and people to make that happen. I want to send, again, thank you to our panelists. They're the real experts on the call here. They've been great. And then finally, I just want, as always, invite you to consider U.S. soy in all that you do. So, and as it comes to aquaculture, it's just such a tremendous opportunity for all of us that I'm very much looking forward to making that a reality here. So I've spoken enough. I've come to take almost all of our initial time here, but I wanted to first invite Jerry to, Jerry, you've been a director now serving on our executive committee. Could you just talk about SAA and some of the past, because that's the history I certainly wasn't necessarily a part of, and you're a leader, right? So talk about a little bit about the past of SAA and then why it's so important to you as a farmer.
Thank you, Easton. I'd like to start out first by thanking all our QSSBs that help fund our research. We've got a lot of different projects going now. We've had a lot in the past. I think we've done between 12 and 15 different species. As Easton said, each species is unique to itself. Some species we can get a lot of soy in and have very good results, and some we are kind of challenged with. So the biggest challenge I see here in the feed industry is finally trying to get enough pounds and species to be fed and to work through that. One of the things that seems to be going very, very well at this point in time is the Atlantic salmon. University of Idaho is doing some feeding research. The poundage, the way it looks now coming down the line, is going to be very substantial, being raised in the U.S. And I think this will be an excellent opportunity for consumption of soy into the feed process. And our feed manufacturers will have a larger number to work with in that process. So I think we go from basically almost 100% in the catfish to, I think, in the eastern Neglect to say yellow perch. We're doing some research on the yellow perch in Ohio, and we're only at 10 to 15% inclusion rate at that time. So, we've got this to work forward to. As we progress ahead in our soybean industry, we are finding a huge amount of usage for our soybean oil. And in this process, we are going to have additional source of soybean meal that's going to be present that we're going to have to find a use for or a program to use it in. And with 85% of our aquaculture products that are imported into the US from overseas, we should have a huge opportunity to expand our production in the US and use some of this product here. As we move ahead, we've started out when I came on, basically we had soybean meal. We had a little bit of modification through our one process that we use in a fermentation process to break down the soybean meal and make it more advantageous to the intestines and the inner workings of our aquaculture species. We've also have another product where they use enzymes to break it down. And as we move ahead, I think we'll probably develop some other processes to make our soybean meal more valuable to our aquaculture species to make it more valuable there. Again, Easton said we have some challenges on our regulations, both in state and in outside waters of the US. And we do work with NAA. We try to each year get someone from our board to accommodate and work with NAA in a trip to DC to speak with our legislators. 3 years ago, I think I was elected or asked to do that. It was amazing being from the Midwest. A lot of our legislators weren't very familiar with the aquaculture industry, but with our NAA representatives, as we were there down into the South, they knew exactly what we were talking about. They knew our problems. They knew what we needed to work with. And it was very interesting to sit there. It was kind of surprising to the legislators. We're coming in as an aquaculture group, and I was there as a soybean farmer. And they said, "What are you doing here as a soybean farmer with aquaculture?" And I said, "We're promoting soybean as a new source or a continuing available source of protein to help feed the aquaculture species." So it was an interesting trip there. So as far as ag, I think we now have, as far as soybeans, we have some newer genetics that are coming through. We have a high leg, and it looks very promising going into a lot of the aquaculture feeds. Earlier this evening or this morning, I had a discussion with our nutritionist and talked with him about a number of years ago, they were looking at possibly putting the omega-3 gene into the soybeans to help as a food product. And our discussion kind of looked at the opportunity there, and he thought it would be an excellent opportunity in the feed industry if we could get a good source of omega-3 through our soybean oil and our meal to work through that process. So looking forward to a lot of new things. Again, Easton said with USEC and WISH overseas, 85% of our product comes from somewhere other than the US. So we're working hard trying to help them incorporate soy into their projects. We're working with them in the new different forms of management for their product and developing different ways of growing it overseas. Unfortunately, it looks like overseas they're much more progressive in developing the new technologies to produce the aquaculture over there, and we're kind of lagging behind in the US. And I think we need to work on trying to get that to come through. And if we can get the new technology on a larger basis here, and I don't know the reasoning, if it is the age of the producers, if it is the cost of the producers, or if there's some regulations that we need to help incorporate into this process, it would be very beneficial to help through that process. Again, we are looking at trying to make aquaculture a huge portion of our consumption of soybeans, and anything we can do. Anyone has any ideas, pass them along to us, how we can help promote this. And we're doing all the work we can and doing the research, trying to help out the industry as far as how to feed or what to feed. And I think once we get larger numbers of each of the different species, I think it will be easier for the nutrition companies to produce a quality product here that will be incorporated in there.
Thank
Turn
you,
it back
Jerry.
over to Easton.
Yes, thank you. So for the sake of time, again, Jerry is certainly a source of wisdom in this space. And I just realized I need to have more phone calls with you, Jerry, to make sure I capture all the great context and past, but I'll get there. And for the sake of time, if you have questions for Jerry, please do send them in the chat. I noticed a couple of you have already asked for contact information. I put that up on the slide just a moment ago. I'll have it again at the end. There's a QR code. You can save my direct contact information. And then it looks like Redmi from Bangladesh says, hi, everybody. So with that, we'll transition to Hannah Lucas. Hannah, I realized I misspelled your name on the opening slide, so I apologize for that. But I want to introduce you. Hannah works on business development and strategy team at Benson Hill to evaluate new product opportunities and conduct pre-commercial activities for products nearing the end of their R&D life cycle. Hannah will focus on the sustainability story and how Benson Hill is using breeding to build better feed products. So welcome, Hannah. If I missed anything in your introduction, please fill in the gaps, but it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Easton, and good to meet everyone on the call. Like Easton said, I've been with Benson Hill for 4 years now, which is a long time when you're at a late stage startup. So I have a few slides that I can present today, just showcasing the company and then what soy products we are positioning to the aquaculture industry, both domestically and in international markets. So Easton, I'm going to switch over to my screen, if that works. Here you go. Okay, can everyone see my slides?
Looks great.
Okay, let's see if I put in presenter mode. How about now? Is that good?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll start with just a bit of background on Benson Hill. We are a crop genetics company or crop development company at our core. Benson Hill started out 10 years ago. Actually, we had our 10th birthday last Friday as a basically cloud-based genomics analytics platform. So we were working with seed companies to help them implement advanced breeding techniques in their pipelines. And, about 3 or 4 years ago, we said, why don't we just use this great tool that we built ourselves, because we had a lot of ideas on product development in soy specifically. And so we acquired soy genetics. We built out a supply chain to process all of our own goods. And then you arrive at the company Benson Hill is today. So when you look at our employee base over here on the left, we have about 350 employees now. The company is based in St. Louis, Missouri, but we have processing facilities in Indiana and Iowa, both soy crushing facilities, as well as a pea concentrate facility in the Dakotas, and breeding stations really all around the Midwest. And most of Benson Hill's IP, like I said earlier, we're a crop genetics company. So most of the developments of Benson Hill are in the area of improved soy and pea genetics. So that's where all of our IP is. Benson Hill is a late stage startup is what I like to say, but we did go public last fall. So we listed on the New York Stock Exchange as BHIL, very exciting time for the company. So we've grown from a small startup in St. Louis. When I joined, there was about 60 people to 350 strong now and listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So it's been a really fun ride. So I'll get into why Benson Hill is working with folks in aquaculture. So like I said, crop development company, if you think about the #1 breeding goal for most seed companies, historically, it's been to increase yields and targeting things like drought tolerance, disease resistance, really increasing those bushels per acre. And Benson Hill realized with the growth of new markets like aquaculture and plant-based foods, and also the increasing focus of the consumer on where their food comes from, we saw a lot of opportunity in prioritizing other traits in soy development that are relevant to the end consumer, whether the end consumer is a fish or the end consumer is a human. And so what those traits might be are flavor, shelf life, nutrient density, function, and various applications. And so Benson Hill's R&D process really begins with identifying a consumer need first. So we can start at the top of the circle here with consumer need. For a fish, depending on what species it is, because different species have wildly different nutritional requirements, of course. In the case of aquaculture, we would typically go to an aquafeed company and say, what would you like to be different about the soy ingredient you're using? Does it need to have higher protein? Does it need to have lower anti-nutrients? Does it need to have lower fiber? And then we kind of work backwards and see if we can address that from a genetics standpoint. And so that's really the novel way that Benson Hill thinks about genetics development. The other unique thing about Benson Hill is that we're vertically integrated. So usually a seed company will sell seed to a grower and the chain stops there. Then a large processor would buy that grain from the farmer and transform it into soybean meal, oil, et cetera. But because we wanted full control, keeping our varieties separate in the supply chain, we decided to acquire soy crushing facilities so that we have full control, full chain of custody of that product throughout its life cycle. So I mentioned this earlier, but we really built out this strategy by acquiring 2 crushing facilities. One is in Creston, Iowa, and one is in Seymour, Indiana. Small to mid-sized facilities, which really fits our stage of growth right now. And so what we do is we will commercialize a new variety of soy. We will contract that soy with a farmer, buy back their entire harvest, and then bring that grain into one of these 2 facilities and process it into soy meal. The Creston, Iowa facility also does soy flours and textured soy flours for the human food industry. So this gives us really tight control over the product integrity, and it also has really interesting implications for sustainability because we know every field that our soy is grown on. So what is our footprint this year? In 2021, Benson Hill planted 70,000 acres of soy. Some of that went into the aqua industry. Some of it was specialty oils. Some of it was varieties more suited for human food consumption. But we're looking at 70,000 acres. And this season, we put about 110,000 acres into the ground. So we're growing at a pretty quick clip. And so our first soy product that we're positioning to the aquaculture industry is called Bright Day. This is a very high protein, low anti-nutrient soybean meal, and those traits are very, very important in marine species. So in the United States, you see a lot of tilapia, a lot of catfish grown, but hopefully with the improvement of regulation in the United States, we will increase our production of marine finfish species like pompano, hybrid striped bass, maybe even salmon, etc. So when we process these unique varieties of soy into soy meal, we get 55% protein in that soy meal on a wet basis. So we're getting close to the protein levels of a soy protein concentrate. And soy concentrate is the preferred soy ingredient that's used by those marine species that have very high protein diet requirements, whose gut aren't used to those anti-nutrients. So because we're able to lower the anti-nutrient levels, and by anti-nutrients, I mean complex carbohydrates like raffinose and stachyose, from traditional breeding techniques, and also crank up the protein in the bean, we can get to a protein level that's comparable to SPC just in a soybean meal. So I want to double click quick on the sustainability benefit of this. So because we can get to such a high protein level in the meal, we're skipping a concentration step or an ethanol wash step that's typically required to take a meal to a concentrate. And that has a really big carbon and water savings. So Benson Hill does life cycle assessments on all of our products every year. And we see almost a 90%, 80 or 90% reduction in CO2 emissions per kilogram of product compared to a soy concentrate. So this is super relevant for our European customers. They're starting to put like carbon and water levels on seafood packaging, for example, but certainly we believe that this will start happening in the United States as well. So having a life cycle assessment on your ingredient is becoming increasingly important as we talk to feed companies. Okay, and then I'll just show 2 slides on a feeding trial that we did. So when we decided to bring this product to market, the first feeding trial that we wanted to do was in Atlantic salmon. And that is because that is the most finicky fish when it comes to anti-nutrients. So we designed a feeding trial with the Center for Aquaculture Technologies. They're up in Prince Edward Island, Canada. And we tested replacing soy concentrate at a 10, 20, and 30% inclusion with our soy meal. And here are the results of the feed conversion ratios. So on the left, we have our 2 control diets. We had a diet with 25% inclusion of soy protein concentrate and 25% inclusion of regular soybean meal. And then on the right, we had 2 different varieties of Benson Hill's high protein soy, one that just had the really concentrated protein and one that also had the complex carbohydrates removed. And you start to see that once we increase the protein level from 10, 20 to 30%, you almost start seeing a dose effect in the variety that didn't have that low anti-nutrient trait. And you might be avoiding the dose effect in the variety that does have the lower anti-nutrients. So this was promising for us to see. But regardless, this trial showed us and is showing our feed customers that a 10% inclusion of our low anti-nutrient soy meal is safe in Atlantic salmon in a species that typically would not consider including soybean meal in their formulations. So like I said, not a ton of salmon grown in the United States, but that could definitely change. It could change as recirculating systems for salmon are stood up in the US and if we're able to get offshore aquaculture off the ground as well. So I will stop my presentation there and flash up my contact info as well.
Thank you, Hannah. One question for you. Looks like, how do you select fish focus, or do you rely on that from a feed company to determine trait assessment? Would you look at it, I'm sorry, it's small here. Would you look all the way to the aquaculture farmer?
Yes, absolutely. So we are in dialogue with aquaculture farmers because actually for sustainability reasons, they're the ones that will benefit from a lower GHG fish because they have to tell that story to a retailer or to a seafood distributor. So the farmers are actually quite interested in the sustainability benefits of the product. And we also talk to farmers for, new product development ideas. The overwhelming feedback that we have gotten is if you can keep pushing the protein higher and higher and it still has, about the same cost structure as a soy meal, then we're producing a more affordable and nutrient dense ingredient. And hopefully that value is pulled through to the farmer. Yep.
Excellent. Well, please do submit more questions. I'm going to share my screen here as we transition to Dr. Kevin Fitzsimmons. So we will have time at the end. I know we're a little bit off schedule here, but we will have time within our hour to answer more questions. So please do submit those through the Q&A. But then I will introduce, Dr. Kevin Fitzsimmons is past president of the World Aquaculture Society and a professor and extension specialist at the University of Arizona. Kevin will speak on the use of soy as a means to replace fish oil and fish meal in aquaculture, keeping fish in the water for other ocean life. So Kevin, if you want to share your screen, or I think we are sharing it internally, but I will pass it to you to introduce yourself and transition your presentation.
Thank you, Easton. It's a pleasure to be here. And Kimberly's going to just do the slides for me, keep it simple. And so we'll go back to the first one. There you go. Yeah, just a couple real quick points on aquaculture. Basically, we're domesticating and farming aquatic animals and plants, and we are redoing terrestrial agriculture. We've done what terrestrial agriculture did in 5,000 years, aquaculture's basically done in the last 50 years. But what we're seeing right now is this big switch of transitioning from using a lot of fish meal and fish oil to more sustainable and economic formulated feeds, mostly based on terrestrial components, grains, oilseed meals, farmed animal byproducts. We're using a lot of poultry and pork byproducts now, and some more new, more novel things like insects and algae meals and single cell proteins. Okay, let's go ahead. Just another point on how fast aquaculture has grown around the world. 2005 FAO reported that 50% of all the fish consumed around the world were farm raised. 6 years later, they pointed out that 50% of all seafood was farmed. In 2012, more tons of fish were farmed than beef on the planet. And in 2020, FAO pointed out that 60% of all seafood around the world was now farm raised. So it's really very rapidly domesticating our seafood supply around the world. Okay. But one of the big problems was that as Hannah and Jerry, Easton, you've all already pointed out, that fish meal, which we get from forage fishes, the sardines, the herrings, anchovies, things like that. It's an important ingredient in fish feed. Historically, it was pretty readily available, provided very good nutrition, but it was removing a huge biomass from marine ecosystems. So the whales couldn't eat them. The dolphins, the seals, the seabirds, larger predatory fish had not enough of these forage fishes to eat. And because of overfishing, the supply has been dropping for years. Those of you who remember back, the sardine was a huge industry off of California, which disappeared in the 1960s because of overfishing and still has not come back. We're seeing this happen with other fisheries around the world of forage fishes. Okay. And so just a graphic showing that if we take out the forage fish, which are mostly growing on zooplankton, which feed on phytoplankton, but if they're not there, then a lot of the big predatory fishes, rock fishes, salmon, tuna, don't have enough to eat. Sea lions, dolphins, humpback whales, seabirds are all, and we see these populations crashing around the world of seabirds, marine mammals, despite all of our efforts to bring them back. Maybe we get a few whales back, but dolphins are got down, a lot of other species. So let's go ahead. What has happened is that the aquaculture industry in its growth has really bought up all, well, not all, but 75, 80% of the world's supply of fish meal and fish oil, whereas before it was used a lot in chicken, pig, dairy, but aquaculture was willing to pay more for it. So those industries, frankly, have found other alternatives, with soy being a very important substitute there. Okay. But the global supply has been going down for 30 some odd years. It's already down a third globally. So we've got to find even more alternatives. Okay. And so we'll go to the next one. And soy, through USEC and SAA, other groups, have been promoting soy for aquaculture for really more than 40 years already. And aquaculture has embraced soy with open arms. with a whole lot of the nutrition studies having been supported by the soy industry. As has been correctly pointed out, different aquaculture species have different dietary requirements, and figuring out the soy products that best fit those nutritional requirements has been an ongoing research effort. Let's go ahead. And very importantly, fish meal, fish oil production around the world has actually decreased since its high point in the 1990s, but it never really increased that much, even from baseline. Meanwhile, soybeans, soy oil have continued to increase, not only to supply aquaculture, which has been one of the major buyers, but also to replace the forage fish meals that had been used in poultry and pork and dairy. Okay, so let's go ahead. Globally, soy products, when again, as Hannah and Jerry pointed out, when we look at soy protein concentrate, soybean oil meal, lecithin, soy oil, it's about 30% of most aquaculture diets already. And that the fish meal, fish oil contents, which used to be 40, 50%, in many cases have dropped back down into 5, 10, 15% fish meal, fish oil in a lot of these diets. And as Jerry kindly already pointed out, the selective breeding and some of the GMO soy have been already able to alter a lot of amino acid profiles so that they're even closer to fish meal and providing even better nutrition. And as Hannah pointed out, changing some of the breeding programs to reduce the anti-nutrition factors has been another really critical advantage for soy products. The soy oil does not have as many long chain omega-3 fatty acids as fish oil does, but as Jerry pointed out, that's an active field of research, which would be great. But they do still provide a lot of really critical shorter chain fatty acids that are used in aquaculture for nutrition, for energy for the fish. So those are very, very important. Okay, I think that's the last slide. Is that right? Okay, I think that's the last one. I'm also involved with another group called the Future of Fish Feeds, and we've been working with the soy industry as well as some of the other ingredients, whether that's animal processing byproducts or single cell proteins, the algae folks, because while soy is certainly an excellent ingredient, it's not the silver bullet to completely replace fish meal and fish oil. So we are working with a lot of folks who are using some of these novel ingredients along with soy to better match up with the nutritional requirements of the various species, whether that's shrimp or marine fish or freshwater fish. We think that, or we know that as long as we meet the nutritional requirements, it's not so important what the ingredients are. With the advanced feed formulation software that's out there now, we can use soy, different soy products, and bring in some algae or insect meals or whatever to get even better amino acid profiles and fatty acid profiles, vitamin mineral profiles to best match up what our nutrition experts are telling us are the best, most efficient diets for the various aquaculture species. So it's made huge differences over the last 30, 40 years as we dial in better and better the nutritional requirements and formulated feeds that match up better and better. Some of the aquaculture genetics is shifting slightly. The ability of fish and shrimp and other aquatic animals to work better with different formulations as we can shift a little bit even with the animal physiology, just as we have with terrestrial animals. So aquaculture and the soy industry have had a great partnership over more than 40 years. It's been mutually beneficial, and we certainly expect that to continue well into the future. And so let me go ahead and cut there. We'll save more time for questions for the panel. And I'll turn it back to Easton.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Continue. I'm going to stop sharing screen there. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure who best to answer these. So if anyone feels inclined, please let me know. Otherwise, we can find some better answers at the end. So this is back from actually when you were speaking, Hannah. I'm not sure if it's directed to you or not, but increased omega-3 expression was mentioned as an ideal soybean trait added to soybean genome. Any other traits that could be beneficial to aquaculture?
Yes.
Did we lose you, Hannah? Yes was a good answer.
Anti-nutrients for fish are, can you hear me?
Sorry, Hannah, you froze there for a moment. We heard yes, and then you froze. So
and then all the good stuff cut out. Okay. So we are targeting other anti-nutrients in the soy. And we've actually received some USB grants for that work as well. So we're going after saponins. Interestingly, saponins are an anti-nutrient issue for the fish and also a taste issue for humans. So we can kind of hit both markets with that trait. And then also trypsin inhibitor, urease, etc. Lowering fiber is always interesting, although that's more of a processing parameter we might tweak with. So deholing more aggressively. In the crush process, but yeah, just additional anti-nutrients are the focus right now. On omega-3s, at least in Benson Hills, admittedly limited research in that area. Plants can't make long chain omega-3 fatty acids like de novo in plant species, and so you kind of have to take a GMO approach for that, and the timeline and capital required for a novel GMO trait is just pretty intense. So looking at shorter chain omega-3s as well. Yep.
Kevin, I believe this is for you. How do we process soybeans ahead of algae research or move more quickly to meet the needs of research investment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and so GMO omega-3 is a great example of really valuable research, as are a lot of the points that Hannah made. The algae people have been able to gather up an enormous amount of venture capital in the last few years. So they may have some advantages there, but just that the algae inherently is the source of a lot of the omega-3s in nature. So again, they've got a bit of built-in advantage there. But as Hannah pointed out, there's still lots of other factors that can be addressed. A lot of it by really good selective breeding. Now with all the genetic tools that are out there that really speed up the selective breeding process, I think is really helping the soy folks to deliver these improved strains and products. And I think Hannah's also right that Benson Hill and these other outfits that are separating out their product lines from the whole soybean oil, commodity, soybean oil meal commodity is brilliant. I think that's really the way that a lot of this is going to go in the future.
Great. Thank you for the question, Regan. Thanks, Kevin, for chiming in there. A question from Jeff Hutton. What's the main priority that must be addressed if the relationship between aquaculture and soybeans is to grow in the United States? Awareness, regulations, funding. I think we could go down every one of those suggestions for an answer, but maybe Jerry, you want to start? What do you think the biggest barrier to aquaculture and soybean growth is? You're on mute, just heads up.
I think probably the regulations is part of it. We've had some discussions where some of the research facilities down in Florida, they think they're going to be close. Once they find out they're way offshore, they're not near as concerned about it. I also think probably we need the research from Hannah's group and that, we need to incorporate everything together. We need the portions of algae, soy, make a better quality product. When you talk about fish meal, a couple $1,000s a ton comparison to soybean meal, we're definitely different there. I think also the priority will be to get more numbers in the U.S. I know we're doing a lot overseas, but if we want to improve the aquaculture industry in the U.S., we're going to need to have more of it brought back here and produced in the U.S. And at that point in time, I think a lot of our researchers and developers in the genetic and in the processing will have more incentive to do it once there's a larger demand for it.
Let me add just one other quick thing. One of the annoyances I've had with some of the environmental groups is that they are confounding soy from Brazil that's being grown in rainforest and the Pantanal with soybean around the world. And, they keep talking about cutting down rainforest and soybean doing this and that. And it's a tiny percentage of soy grown around the world. And most of the soy, I mean, you guys know, it's been grown on farms that have been, there for hundred or hundreds of years in some cases, especially in Europe. And it's much more of a sustainably farmed product. And we need to get that word out better, that, the stuff that's grown in Brazil is a fraction of farmed soy around the world, and getting soy sustainability better in front of industry is really important.
Easton, I'd like to add a little bit here. We talk about the sustainability of soybeans. We have a carbon index score that is basically a worldwide score, where we in the soybean industry are now trying to bring it back into the U.S. score. You can have the world score, but we want one designed for the U.S. because we are losing ground. We're not expanding our ground every year. We'd also like to look at possibly coming into the Midwest and seeing how our Midwest score would compare to the entire score of the U.S. So we're working on it. We have to get this proven, and we need to do some research to get our scores where we need to be in the U.S.
That's great. Hannah, any other thoughts, ideas on how the two industries grow together?
Yeah, meaning international and domestic?
Aquaculture and
Aquaculture and soy. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. I think Benson Hill has a slightly different perspective just because usually when we benchmark our Bright Day product, we're benchmarking against soy concentrate as opposed to like a commodity meal, whether it's grown in the U.S. and processed in the U.S. or South America. And the majority of soy protein concentrate used in marine diets comes from Brazil. And so a lot of the steps that specifically the European industry has done to convert the source of their soy in Brazil to a sustainable source has indirectly pushed U.S. soy out of the market because we don't have those certification systems as like a standard practice here in the U.S. But our life cycle assessment has shown, and numbers in the GFLI database has shown, if anyone else is familiar with doing life cycle assessments, that U.S. soy is, more sustainable than soy grown in many other areas of the world, and that's because we use lower inputs, have regenerative agriculture practices we're employing, and so I think the U.S. has a sustainability story to tell. And our domestic aquaculture industry can benefit from that, and our exports can benefit from that. So I know USEC has been doing a lot of work to tell that story, and we're trying to help them as well. So I think it's communicating. We need to just get better at selling the sustainability merits of soy that's grown in the United States. Yeah.
That's a great perspective. I think from just to wrap up, there's not one single source. And I think even in the question, right, it's a combination of regulation. It's a combination of coordination among all these different entities moving in the same direction. And I do think that we have a huge opportunity both with the advent of sustainability. It's always been sustainability as a priority, but now with carbon markets becoming more and more important for brands and for food, and then just an opportunity for the consumer to want domestically produced fish. I think that is starting to evolve. I'm just fascinated by the carbon that's spent to ship soybeans abroad, to feed fish, and then ship it back. I mean, that alone starts to really make a dent in both of the opportunities and for those two industries to grow. But there's not one single solution, and that's kind of what SIA is here to do, is start to coordinate the soybean producing states with our national soybean organizations and all of our private partners like Benson Hills. So anything that we can do as an organization to continue taking inches to that monumental task, that's what we're here to help with. So I will end with thanking everyone again for, first of all, thanking the panelists. Great expertise, great thoughts shared in the webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. And then I was remiss, and I apologize. This was not made possible without the Kansas Soybean Commission. They are the funder of this webinar, and I neglected to put that in at the beginning. So farmer checkoff dollars are what make this happen. And so we're happy to be here, happy to fund that, and especially appreciative to the Kansas Soybean Commission for sponsoring this particular webinar. We'll have a few more later in the year, so please pay attention to our website and social channels to register for those. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And thank you again for a wonderful webinar. Have a great 4th of July and a great weekend, everyone.